So in a surprising turn of events, it seems that the Japanese Liberal Democratic Party is upset with, I don't know what they call it, rough translations, but basically their more right-leaning party wants to cheapen food for, you know, those in poverty and things, and the Liberal Democrats are upset about this. Now, you probably are thinking, why would Liberal Democrats be upset about lowering the price of goods and services, especially essential things like food, for the masses? How could that hurt them? Well, they actually make a decent argument. Their argument is that if they lower the cost of food, it will take them off of, you know, equivalent of food stamps and EBTs and things like that. The more they reduce the cost of goods, the less they will take away their, agency, the less they will take away their concessions by the government, and thereby it'll actually be more expensive for them in the long run. Now, there is no way to know that unless you do a thorough investigation of the economic costs versus the benefits. I am not that familiar with Japanese economics to make that assessment, but what I could tell you is from a Western standpoint, when you compare that to Western costs and things like that, if you would, well, that's assuming that Western government would provide you anything, which they don't. But let's assume that they did. For the purpose of this argument, let's assume that the Western government is giving you your provisions, and you could either take that option or you could take the option of reduced costs and services and depend on your own income to do so. The difference is in what's important to you. What the government thinks is important to you is obviously different from what you think is important to you. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. What you think is important to you might not be necessarily what you need, but it's something that you want. And sometimes it can be the opposite. Sometimes what the government deems is something that is, well, at least good, more good than another thing, is not so, especially in America, where in America pizza is a vegetable. So, knowing that, we have to decide for ourselves which one of these options would be better. And I guess this really only applies to Japan. Unless you're Japanese, it makes no difference. Nothing, regardless of which way Japan goes, it's not going to affect the rest of the world. It's not going to affect the global economy. It's barely going to affect the Japanese economy. They're just worried about whether or not it will affect the poorest of Japanese people. And if you ask me, I think the issue isn't so much that they should lower the prices or that they should, keep it the way it is with the welfare programs or things like that. I think they're going about this all wrong. And what I mean by that is that instead of worrying about things like food and board and stuff like that, what they should do is they should provide an almost debit card system to all forms of goods and services. In other words, make like a mercantile system in the electronic age. And what I mean by that is, imagine if you ever remember old school video games like Doom and Duke Nukem and things like that. You remember how you needed a key card to go access from point A to point B. So you wanted to get to the second level, you had to find a blue card. But if you wanted the secret level where you could get a whole bunch of crap, you had to have the yellow card. Now imagine if we were to convert this into the activities of life thereof. Imagine for food you used the yellow card. Imagine for PlayStation or whatever, you used the blue card. Or you could pick the color you want. It really doesn't matter. The point is that if we were to separate all commodities into blue and yellow cards and red cards, obviously green card is taken, that would get rather confusing. What you could then do is then regulate that market so much easier and so much better, because you then have a better idea of how high in demand that commodity is, how finite that commodity is, and how necessary that commodity is. If then you were to develop a system where, food might be kind of expensive, but you're providing people with massive amounts of entertainment. They might not have the best lives, but they won't notice. They'll be very distracted, which is good enough. That's good enough for most nations. I bet, Iran, well, Iran's pretty developed. I mean, like Iraq or Afghanistan, things like that. They would love that. They would love to know that they could just give their people alcohol and opiates and things like that. They wouldn't need to worry about if they're going to eat tomorrow. Now, obviously, that's not the most optimal. It's certainly a human rights violation in some respects, but given their situation, they probably don't have as much access to the yellow food card as they do the blue card of, alcohol and opiates. And at that, their blue card might be different than your blue card. Your blue card is probably going to be the video games and the pornography and things like that. But if we were to think in terms of the economy, this blue and yellow card and things like that, we could better come to an understanding of how to centralize it and, negate all the negative effects thereof. So I think the short version of what I'm trying to say here is that before we worry about whether we should cheapen the cost of goods or keep government provisions, is to first worry about classifying them into these more, generic apparatuses from which we can then determine what to regulate. We do that with people. People are in a class bracket. You talk to a person, and when you ask them what their job is, they don't act like, oh, that's just what I do for a living. That's just what I do to make money. No, they define themselves by their job. They define themselves as that thing. And Marx warned about that. Marx warned about the commodification of the human being. And I know a bunch of people are going to be like, oh, he's quoting Karl Marx. Marx didn't know anything about the economy. Actually, Marx knew quite a bit about the economy. Marx was a very intelligent man. And Marx called it on 90% of things. Marx called it way more than Austrian economics did, or even Keynesian economics did. And Keynesian economics did mountains of good for America and for Western society in general. And Marx predicted more things thereof. Now, whether or not you agree with Marxists is none of my concern. That's a moral quandary. That is not the reality. And that's what Marx focused on, the reality, the material conditions. And the material conditions are people are a commodity. People view themselves as what they do. What they do defines who they are, rather than the other way around. So, if we can do that with people, why can't we do that with the actual things? And then from there, when we do that with the actual things, we can use that commodity to better define people. We can use that commodity to then better people. You know what I'm saying? So that's something to think about. And hopefully the Japanese government will think about that too. I will try to link them to this video. And maybe we can see in our lifetimes the blue, the red, the yellow card. And then we can go on to stage 2. That's it.